All right, there we go. All right, everyone, it's good to see you all and have you here. Thanks for joining. This is one of our annual meetings that we have every few months during the year. So we're going to kind of catch up now. Our next one will be in August. So we're going to do today just kind of talk about some of the work that we've been working on the past however many months. It's been a while since we all connected, which is exciting. So kind of as a reminder for the folks that it's been a minute for you, we are an organization that's part of the Thriving Earth Exchange. These are the folks who've connected us with hydrologists, which I'll actually be talking about in a little bit today. And they've been putting us in touch with various different organizations around the country, including Anthropocene Alliance, which also helps us. They were the ones who connect us with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and so on. So we work with a lot of different organizations, which is exciting. Kind of as a reminder for the folks that have not been as involved lately or just don't remember, it's been a while, kind of organizational structure. So we have our governing board, which includes Diane Henry, who's our assistant director, Jeff Henry, website director, Carrie Adams, technical, and Maureen, who's our secretary. And then we have a number of different project teams that different folks are leading across the organization. And a number of folks on this call are on those teams, which is great. So I appreciate it. I know some of those teams have been kind of silent for the past few months, being winter, everyone's kind of gone and things kind of slow down. So those are all going to be picking up soon. So if you've not heard from your project team leader, you should be hearing from them soon about upcoming meetings for this. So what I want to do now is we actually, all the time, for so long, we've been talking about the flood inundation study that the Army Corps of Engineers has been doing. And they did finally release a study to us. And so this, as a reminder, this study is actually showing, kind of get into a little bit before I actually show that to confuse you. So as a reminder, this study is actually looking, what they did is they collected a whole bunch of data, including using the data we've been collecting for multiple years as an organization to develop a model to figure out how much water would need to be held back to actually have a noticeable impact on our flooding and where could we potentially hold back that water or retain that water or divert the water, whatever it might be, to be able to have that effect on the flooding. Hold on. So what they did once they developed that model, they then ran a few different scenarios in the model to see what would be the effect on the flooding that we have. Now, the data primarily that they were working with was from 2023. So in particular, for those of you that were around, we did have a high flood in August 30th, 2023. And so they were looking at the effect of any different scenarios on that peak flood level in August 30th, 2023. So, what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about those different scenarios that they ran and some of the findings that they found. Um, so, one of the first ones they ran, as we can see here in this first bullet point, it said removing the inflow from South Oar Creek. And so, this is a screenshot from the model itself. And so, what they did was if they said if we held back all the water on August 30th, 2023, so at peak flood level, would that have an effect on the flooding in the area? And so this screenshot that you have from the model is actually of Branch Drive. So we can see here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but we can see Dubrova Creek flowing through. Over on the left side of the model, we have South Oar Creek flowing through. And these are all the wetlands and such that all exist up in that area. We have Branch Drive down here. And so the blue you're seeing is floodwater. The green is land. And so what we're seeing here is that if if water was held back on South Oar Creek on August 30th, 2023, it would reduce that peak flood level by 0.1 feet. Okay, so unfortunately, what they found is in that type of scenario, holding the water back once we're flooded really doesn't reduce the flood level a whole lot. It's only reducing it by 0.1 feet. So that's one of the scenarios they ran. They ran I believe, six different scenarios. So another scenario they ran was to reduce the flow from Dubrova Creek. So if I go back to this screenshot, we have Dubrova Creek right here. So this would be somewhere up in this area or in this area, wherever it may be, to actually hold back the water on Dubrova Creek. Would that reduce the the flood level or like where the floodwaters are? And what they found, unfortunately, is that it wouldn't do anything to that peak flood level on August 30th, because that's what they're basing their model on. Another idea that they had was to raise Branch Drive. And so I don't know what the level they were looking at raising it to, so I can't quite say to speak to that. I'd have to look into the details of the study, which we will post after this meeting. But unfortunately, that also would not have an effect on the flood level, again, based on the modeling that they ran. So then another scenario that they ran is this fourth bullet point down here. It says where they would to reduce the backwater from the Huron River. And so what this was showing is they, based on their data, they felt that there was a chance that water from the Huron was actually flowing back into Little Oar. And so the thought was, well, if you cut off the outflow from from Little Oar into the Huron River, what would that do to the flood level at that August 30th level? And what they found is that would actually increase the flooding that we had. Now, I will say from those of us that sit around here, it's probably not surprising if you block off the outflow, it's going to actually increase it. Unfortunately, that didn't actually matter. In fact, they also ran it where it would block it off and pump out the water that we already have, and it still wouldn't actually make a difference. And so that's what this last one is. So this last point they made here, and this fifth bullet point, is a temporary closure of Oar Lake or Little Oar into the Hurons. That would be blocking off the culvert from Little Oar into the Huron River, and then use a pumping station to pump out the water from Oar Lake, Little Oar into somewhere else. Would that make a difference? And so the argument here is that the solution is thought to be that it would work, but they weren't able to actually run that through the model. So unfortunately, the way the Army Corps studies work is they get a set amount of money. In this case, they had $125,000 to do all of the data collection they needed from Oar Lake at the outflow to the Huron River, all the way up to, I think it was Woodland Lake, along South Oar Creek. They also did a little bit of data collection around Dubrova Creek. We gave them a bunch of data as well. So between all of the data collection, the actual development of the model, and then running the scenarios, they kind of, in a sense, ran out of time and money. So they were not able to test that last scenario. The thought is that it may work, but it's not quite sure. They're not quite sure because it wasn't actually tested. Okay, so so as you can see, it was actually four scenarios they ran through the model, and then a fifth one that they thought would work, didn't have a chance to run it. So the hard part for me seeing this is it looks like there's nothing we can do. Now, let's pause for a second with that, because one of the things with this study, there's a little bit of uncertainty with it. So like anytime you run a model, there's always going to be some form of uncertainty, some form of unknown with the model. And depending on the data you're using and how much data you have and the inputs you're putting and the scenarios you're putting, things could change. So one of the concerns or uncertainties about this report that we had is the way or the methodology they were using to run the scenarios themselves. So for each of those scenarios, so each of these 5 bullet points, removing the inflow, reducing the flows from Dubrova, raising Branch Drive, reducing backwater, each of those, they ran those individually. So instead of saying, well, what if we remove the inflow from South Oar Creek and the inflow from Dubrova Creek, what would happen? Again, they didn't have time and the ability to do that, so they only ran those separately. So that's one uncertainty that we have with it, is the way they ran those models. Also some concerns about the scenarios that were chosen. So these particular scenarios that were chosen here, there were some concerns about like why those, like for example, reducing the backwater from the Huron River. Well, we know if you're going to plug up the drain, it's going to keep filling up. And that's basically what Little Oar is that's our drain. So it's kind of some questions as to why that. And on top of it, the way they ran each of these scenarios was looking at what would be the effect if we did this when you were flooded, like when we were all flooded, what would be the effect? Instead of doing, for example, the very first bullet point, removing the inflow from South Oar Creek, we all know when we get a big rainstorm come through, we have about 4, 5, 6 days until the water gets here. Well, if we started to hold back that water on South Oar Creek, what would that do to our flooding versus waiting until we're already flooded? When they ran the model, they actually did it more when we were already flooded because that was the data they were working with. So there was some uncertainties there with the way the scenarios they chose and the kind of the way they ran those scenarios. So like I said, we have the report. We will release it after that. But the good thing about this is we now have a model that we can actually use to test different ways these scenarios might work. So as I said at the beginning, and you've been hearing me say this for like years now, we work with various hydrologists, Dr. Wendy Robertson, Dr. Rod Lammers, both at Central Michigan, Scott Dirks and Emma Geis, both at GEI Consultants in Ann Arbor. They have been phenomenal throughout this entire process. Claire Zarakis has been the one who put us in touch with them. This is the work that we had through the Thriving Earth Exchange. Their job has been to help us collect the data and then kind of make sense of it. And now the exciting thing is they have this model to actually run some scenarios with. So, kind of with this, what they're doing is they're actually taking this model and actually running different scenarios. We are actually providing them with some other data, specifically weather data, to be able to put into the model to see the effect of the weather data on the scenarios. And then they're running different scenarios, for example, running multiple scenarios simultaneously to see how much do we need to reduce the water inflow in order to mitigate small floods. So for example, if we hold back water on both Dubrova Creek and South Oak Creek, would that help mitigate small floods versus versus just doing one of those? The one thing to note in this, and I will say this, and this is a bit hard to hear, both the Army Corps of Engineers and our hydrologists are in agreement that there really isn't a whole lot we can do to the large floods. So those big times when we have water everywhere, there's not really a whole lot besides just throwing a whole bunch of dirt and raising the land that we can actually do to get rid of all of that water. So right now what they're doing with the model, because of that, they're taking this model and they're trying to figure out what can we do to the smaller floods. So if we think about last summer, which I'm sure we all still remember because that was like hardest summer on record, I would imagine for so many, including myself, because we were flooded for so long. As you remember, we got hit with the hurricane, we got a big flood, and then the water went down, but we were still flooded for a long time. So in the sense that in between was like a small flood, kind of a lower level. And then we got a whole bunch more rain and we got a higher flood back in August, and there may have been one in the middle too. But that lower period where the water had gone down a little bit, but we were still somewhat flooded, that's what we are considering a small flood. And so the idea here with the model is, and this is what our hydrologists are doing, is they're running scenarios to say, is there something we could do to minimize those small floods so that, for example, yes, we get hit with a bunch of rain, we may have a week of actual flooding, but it will actually go down and we'll actually be able to use a lake in our yards and things like that in between. So really trying to help us more in like quality of life to be able to actually live and enjoy the lake and survive here. Again, it's not going to do anything necessarily for the big ones, but at least will help us actually be able to experience and enjoy the area during all the other off peaks for those big floods. So that's what they're working on right now. They're working on it actually as I speak, and so we'll be able to share more information from their findings at our next meeting. That's kind of where it is. Like I said, we will be posting this study on our website afterward, after the meeting today. It's like over 90 pages because majority of the study is about their methodology that the Army Corps used, but the last chapter, in a sense, is about their findings. So if you want to skim through it, I'd suggest looking in that area. And like I said, we'll be kind of looking at more what our hydrologists are able to do with this model. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, they're able to find something to help mitigate those small floods. And at that point, that's when we take the reins and actually look at, okay, what would be those mitigation strategies, whether it's some kind of stop log dam or something like that, or whatever it might be on whatever location it is. And that's where we pursue grant funding to actually do that work. But we can't figure that out yet until we know how much needs to be retained and where that has to happen to be able to pursue that next. So that's kind of where we are. I'm going to pause before moving on to a whole bunch of other things because I just threw a whole bunch of information at you and see what questions people have at this point. I'm going to stop sharing too to give people a chance to jump in.
I have a question.
See Maureen's comment in the chat. So if they did the models before the floodwater was high and covering our land, the results may have been different. Looking at proactive measures would have made more sense to her. Yeah, and that's one of the things that our hydrologists are looking at. Again, unfortunately, nothing is going to stop our flooding. We are incredibly low area. This is what we're dealing with. But the hope is that we'll find something that can help mitigate those small floods so that we can actually have better quality of life here. And while we're waiting to see if anyone has questions, I'm going to pull up. We also had they'd also share, our hydrologists also shared some groundwater maps with us that give you kind of a sense of like the water table levels, which I'll show as well. Brett, you asked the question, why block Little Ore and pump water? What about a bigger opening at Little Ore? That's a scenario that we can consider as well. Yep.
I didn't understand the block water and then pump it with a pump station. What's the thinking behind that? Where would they be pumping the water to? Back into the Huron River, downstream, or what is
That-
the
yeah.
scenario?
So that's a really good question. So when they run these models, they don't actually run the strategy itself. They just run the scenario of would blocking water and pumping it work, basically. We're not going to go into the details of where we would pump it or like what that would look like or anything like that or how much or whatever. Just would it work based on what the model says. The reason they ran that one was because their data showed that there could be some backwater flow from the Huron into Little Ore. And so they ran that to see would that stop what they anticipate to be backwater. I will say the data we've been collecting has never shown that. If anything, it's actually just shown that the outflow from Little Ore just stops when the river's high. Like at one point, I think Jeff, Diane, and I went and actually checked the outflow at Little Ore during a peak flood, and it was just zero. It just wasn't flowing because the river was too high. It couldn't flow out. So it wasn't actually flowing the other direction, but their data was kind of uncertain with that. So that's why they ran that one. Other questions?
I'm assuming they looked at the area where where the streams come in, because there seems to be like several. I know there's two major streams, but there seems to be some other waterways that direction where the new subdivision is being installed. There's like a private drive that kind of branches off, and then
Yeah. So
I walk like a circle there, and there's like another canal or something. I can't really get a good look at it because it's a private area, it's private road, but it seems like there's a lot of different canals flowing to, or like, is there another canal over that we know about over there?
are you talking about on the north side of Ore Lake?
Yeah, yeah. So
Walk up Mohegan?
where the new subdivision is that runs kind of,
Off of Mohegan?
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
where the building that they've got three new houses there.
Yep.
And then they have a
So
private road
yep.
that goes left that's chained, but if you walk, there's a walking path, and you can see kind of like a large body of water, and then it looks like another canal that's over there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just throwing
So yeah, if you walk down, I appreciate you saying that. If you walk down that private road,
yeah.
um, there is a bridge that you'll come to right before the like circle turnaround at the end. That bridge is over South Ore Creek. So what's flowing there is South Ore Creek. The canal that you pass on your way there was dug out. Diane can help me with this a number of years ago before I even got here. And it's really just a canal that was dug out. It doesn't really, it just kind of collects water, doesn't really do a whole lot. There's nothing flowing to it or from it or anything. It's just kind of there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, I did want to share, before moving on, I did want to show you a picture of that groundwater map that Dr. Robertson had shared with us. Now, the purpose of sharing this map with you is to give you a sense of the water table in comparison to the area around us. So this map, it was based on wells, the depths of wells. So some of it may be more accurate than others. It's kind of dependent on whenever someone dug a well and that level was recorded somewhere. But I want to at least show you to give you a sense of where the water table is in comparison to the rest of it. So let me share that part. Okay, so this is a water table map. Let me kind of orient you to it. So in the middle here, you can see we have Ore Lake, and then we have the Huron River kind of flowing on the south side of Ore Lake all the way down and around. And so if we look over on the legend on the side, you have the different depths. And so the darker colors indicate higher levels. The lighter colors in the middle here on Ore Lake indicate lower levels. And so what we're seeing here is if you look around Ore Lake, the water table, and this isn't necessarily surprising to us, but the water table is really about even with the river. So when it comes to the scenario that had been thrown out there about pumping water, the argument is if we try and pump the water, in a sense, we're really just going to be pumping the Huron River because groundwater kind of flows wherever groundwater flows, and it's just going to keep refilling back up because we're at that same level, right? So it's something to just keep in mind when we think about the different scenarios. And that our groundwater table, the ground water table is pretty much even with the Huron. So we're not really getting a lot of gradient there or flow to be able to think about any pumping to actually solve things. So that's why we're trying to look at potentially other strategies. So I just wanted to give you context for this. Does anyone have questions about this before I move in, completely shift gears into some other projects we've been working on? All right, so let me get back to my slides and I will share some of the other projects we've been doing. No, is it not? It's not letting me again. Hold on one second. All right, so what I want to do now is share some updates from different committees. Again, some of them haven't met frequently, some are going to be meeting more frequently, some have been meeting on and off, it just kind of depends. Kind of, oh, I apologize, this is not a committee, this is just more of an update, but I'll jump in the committees in a second. Kind of as a reminder, when we talk about it's springtime, we're about to hit the summer. Last year, one of our projects was getting real-time gauges installed, one on South Oar Creek and one on Dubrova Creek. The one on South Oar Creek was installed, however, it did end up getting broken or damaged or whatever, so it doesn't actually work. So this is the link that you would normally use to go get to that gauge. The Huron River Watershed Council knows that it doesn't work. It's on their list to come out and repair it, so they're going to be repairing it. Also, they're planning to install the real-time gauge on Dubrova Creek as well. So this spring/summer as well. Both of these, like I said, are real time. So kind of like the Huron River gauge, but that's downstream of us and not necessarily our water. These two are upstream. And so when we get a big rain, these ones will actually be able to register where the creek levels are as the water's flowing in. So it'll give us a sense of like, okay, if, for example, if South Oar Creek is here, this is how much water I have in my property. This is what's coming, or this is where what that relationship is between the upstream water levels and what our flooding looks like here. So versus trying to rely on the downstream Huron River gauge, which again isn't necessarily all our water because that's registering all the water coming through the Huron River. We're looking at the water that's coming on South Oar Creek and Dubrova Creek. So these are coming. Again, one it was working and the South Oar Creek one was working. It's not anymore. They're going to be repairing it, but that's something to keep in mind, especially as we start hitting storms, which I think there might be one tonight. So keep an eye out on those gauges as well. And I'll try and send a note out once I know those are up and running again. Okay, so getting into the projects. So the upstream water flow project I don't know, is Carrie on? Did Carrie want to jump in? Because Carrie's been leading this effort. I don't see him. Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump in. So Carrie shared that they're still doing some data collection on Little Oar at the Riverside Culvert. Also tracking the USGS to try and figure out kind of relationships between spring rain effects and the lake drainage rates. So that data has been continually being collected, particularly until things stabilize, though I think it might still be collected for a little while. There's going to be some work being done to actually summarize all the iFlood data that's been collected over the years in the hopes of presenting to the residents and the township to illustrate that the different measured flood levels against the photograph evidence actually show more flood severity than what it says on the river gauge. So because of that, if we remember back, there was that change where flood level was 6.5 feet, then was raised to 7 feet. The purpose of gathering this iFlood data is to try and push back on that and say, no, actually what's considered flood, and we are actually at that at 6.5 feet. And here's all the evidence to show that. And so there's going to be work on that. Carrie, also want to make a note here to say thank you to everyone for your involvement in providing the team with all the data from iFlood. That's been really helpful throughout all of this. And then also this team is working on more long-term mitigation strategy research and possible solutions to try and undertake going forward. And so that's going to be building off of the work with the model with the hydrologists that the Army Corps had developed. So that's kind of working hand in hand. So that's that team. The river outflow folks, they're doing some mapping and monitoring of the vegetation changes. One good thing this spring is that I think it's early leaf pond. I don't know. Diane would know. One of the vegetation plants that grows in the river has actually been not growing as heavily this spring, which is exciting. So it's not as dense as it's been, for example, the past two springs. One thought is we had a more harsh winter this year than we did the past two winters, and so maybe that had some impact of it. So there's been some conversations around that, and this team is going to be looking at some of the kind of mapping slash research around what the relationship is between potentially winters and like ice or ice thickness or whatever it might be and vegetation, because we know if we have increased vegetation that can actually serve as almost like a dam in the river and minimize outflow. So that's one of the things that's working on. There's also going to be at work in a couple, actually, I think like 2 weeks, looking at removing some of the debris from the river to increase the outflow. That team's also in the past winter months. It's been working with Eagle to get approval to be able to do some earlier harvestings. And so talking about the regulations there and what's actually feasible and allowed at that point. Starry Stoneware. Thank you, Diane. There was also Curly Leaf Pond something was another conversation that I saw from the USGS. Okay, so another project was looking at the Fluke Dam. So the Fluke Dam, remember that if you remember, there were lots of conversations about repairs to the Fluke Dam. There was a reassessment of the special assessment district, the boundaries of it for the chain of lakes. That was expanded to include more properties. The funding from that and also a bond is going to be used to actually pay for those repairs. And a few of us, and myself included, were at a meeting at the Huron River Chain of Lakes annual meeting on Saturday this past week. And the Washtenaw Drain Commissioner was there, along with the Assistant Livingston County Drain Commissioner. They were talking about the repairs happening. And those repairs, the plans for that is to start in June on those. So that's making progress, which is exciting. There has been some data collection in relation to the dams raising and lowering, looking at when the dam raises and lowers and what monitoring the data of our lake level to see is there any relationship between the dam raising and lowering and our lake level. And so far the data is showing there isn't really much. So when they raise the dam, our lake doesn't really change much. When they lower the dam, our lake also doesn't change much. So there's not a whole lot there to show change with that. Did I hear a question in there? Okay. Keep going. So another project that we've been working on pretty extensively is those FEMA grants to get funding for some folks to raise their homes. Those have been making progress. So the Swift Current grants for elevating 2 different houses, those are in their second review with FEMA, and so we're waiting to hear back on those. The HMGP application, that grant is for 10 houses. That one already made it through the first review of FEMA and now is in the request for information from FEMA, which is where you have to gather more things, more documents, more information, and all the things that they need. That's going to be actually sent back to the Michigan State Police next week and then on to FEMA at the end of next week for the second round of review from FEMA. So we're kind of in that process. It's a very iterative process. We submit to the state, they review it, give us feedback, we make changes, get those back to the state, then they submit it to FEMA. FEMA reviews, gives feedback, make changes. So there's a lot of iterative work in these grants, but that's been going for really quite a while, I think since August. All 3 of these grants are making progress. So we'll see hopefully in the next X number of months, however long it takes FEMA, to see what their response is after these second rounds of reviews. So that's where those are. Another thing, this is not necessarily associated with our organization, but there's been lots of comments and questions about it, is the Ore Lake Special Assessment District. The petitions for those were drafted. We had a meeting back in April, I believe it was, talking specifically about this. I shared the language of those of the petitions at that time. Those have somewhat started to be circulated, but are going to be more heavily circulated around Memorial Day and after. So keep an eye out as people come walking around with those. The intention of the special assessment district is to fund more weed harvestings than the single weed harvesting that Hamburg Township funds, depending on the funds allowed, and also possibly any harvesting in Ore Lake itself, again, depending on the funding that's available based on what's gathered. For the folks that were not at that meeting back in April, I believe it was, the boundaries for the special assessment district include the properties that are what are called abutting Ore Lake and Little Ore. So not the folks who have deeded access, but only the folks who are actually directly on the water. That's what's considered in the boundaries for that special assessment district. And should it pass, which it needs 60% of the vote to pass, should it pass, that will go into effect on the December tax bill. Okay. And just kind of something to keep in mind. Again, it's to minimize flooding, but please know that all of these efforts are really important, but we're never going to be able to fully get rid of our flooding. We do know that weed harvesting does have an impact. When in the past we have data to show that when the weeds are harvested, a few days later the river drops 10 inches, our lake drops 8 inches. So it does have a big impact. However, there's been plenty of times where the weeds have been harvested in July and we've still flooded in August. So just keep that in mind with all the things that we're talking about today. We're not able to fully get rid of the flooding. Okay, we're doing our best to try and minimize the flooding and make it much more livable for all of us here. So just keep that in mind as we're like thinking about all these different projects and all these things that we're working on. For the iFlood, the iFlood folks, or the iFlood app is still running. So if we do have flooding, which I say if, most likely when we have flooding, please still be reporting that. That's still going to be helpful as we collect more data. And then one kind of, I think a final thing here I just wanted to mention, some of you may have already heard about this, and if not, here's your opportunity to learn about it. Because the special assessment district, if it does pass, would not go into effect until next summer. One of the things that's a question mark with that is would harvesting earlier in the spring, say like late June, would that actually help minimize our flooding? We don't really know. And so one of the some residents actually are working together to pull together what's called a resident funded weed harvesting using a GoFundMe account. And the purpose of this is to really just be a pilot program to determine the potential benefits for any early spring harvesting of the weeds and how much or would it minimize the flooding. We're hoping it would, but we don't actually know. And so the other thing to keep in mind is the harvesting that Hamburg Township does in July, or that's when they aim for, and any harvesting that would happen through the special assessment district all happens from the Hamburg Road Bridge downstream. The purpose of this resident funded weed harvesting, one of the other pieces to this is actually harvesting the weeds upstream of the Hamburg Road Bridge right in front of Little Ore Lake. So when we think about pilot programs, it's another opportunity to think about, well, what would the difference be to harvest? We know that harvesting the weeds downstream makes a difference. What about if we harvest right in front of Little Ore Lake? How much of a difference will that make? And so that's another purpose behind this resident funded weed harvesting is to try and harvest much closer to us where we are being affected to see how much that's actually going to impact our flooding. So this is going to be happening in the upstream of the Hamburg Road Bridge, really from the flat area, the bend in the river near Hidden Lake, all the way to the Hamburg Road Bridge. To do 2 days of harvesting, it would cost around $10,000. So with that, if we think about all the around 200 houses on the lake, it'd be helpful if folks could contribute, ideally around $50 per house. However, that said, any amount anyone can contribute to this is helpful. If we get even $5,000, we can at least do 1 day of harvesting to see how much it helps. But again, the goal is to do 2 days so that we can try and really get rid of the weeds and to really increase the outflow in that really low area right where we are, to see how that can actually affect it. And regardless of what we do with this, even regardless of the special assessment district, Hamburg Township is still planning to do their harvesting downstream of the Hamburg Road Bridge. They always do that in late July. They are able to fund one harvesting a year, and so they pick what they consider to be the most ideal time when the weeds are strong, like thickest and tallest. And so that's usually late July. And that is still their plan this year. The board has already approved that. So that is moving forward for this year. That's the plan, again, depending on the river levels. We already talked about SAD. And then some updates for our organization. We are, up until this point, we have been pretty much just a community organization, a bunch of residents working together, trying to really work hard at our flooding, trying to figure out what's going on, see what we can do to mitigate it. That said, should any mitigation strategies be identified from the modeling with the Army Corps and the hydrologists, which we're really hoping they are, or even any future weed harvesting, if the SAD doesn't go through and such, we want to have mechanisms to actually be able to pursue those, particularly thinking about mitigation strategies that's going to involve not just Hamburg Township, but lots of different municipalities, lots of different across Livingston County and so on. So to allow us to do that kind of work and really thinking about that advocacy work about how we help really think broader about how to mitigate our flooding and minimize our flooding, our organization is looking to kind of expand and expand in exciting ways. And doing that to do that, we're actually going to be becoming becoming a 501c3. And in that process, it's allowing us a chance to kind of pause as not pause as an organization, but kind of reflect as an organization, thinking about what we want our mission to be. So with that, keep an eye out. We're going to be sending a survey out in a little while, asking for your input about what our more larger, expansive mission should be moving forward as an organization, and asking for any folks who kind of want to work on that to come join us, thinking about drafting that mission, drafting that direction for our organization. Likely it might mean a name change for us, and those kinds of things. And then, like always, we're always looking for someone to help with social media. We have a lot going on, and I'm not very great at it. I know some other folks are not interested in it, so any help that anyone could provide would be great. And then kind of a final thing I just want to mention, I had mentioned about removing the debris from the river. There is a river cleanup event on May 31st. If you're interested, please contact Tony Licata, who's been coordinating that, which is very lovely. Thank you, Tony, for doing that. And then we'll have our next meeting on August 23rd in person like we did last year. And then this is, and I'm going to this is a QR code to be able to access the resident funded weed harvesting. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen. I'll give like a 30 seconds here for folks if you want to use your phone to access it, but I'll also put the link to the resident funded weed harvesting GoFundMe account in the chat so you can access it to be able to donate if you haven't already and you're able and willing to, again, to help fund that piloting efforts to try and harvest the weeds closer to where we are. So I'll wait just a moment here for people to use the QR code if you want to access on your phone, and then I'll stop sharing my screen and then we'll share that link in the chat. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now. I will grab the link to the GoFundMe and put it in the chat. But at this point, I want to open up to questions, thoughts, ideas about anything that I've shared. We already had a chance to share about the study from the Army Corps, which we're still happy to answer questions and talk about that if you'd like. But any ideas or thoughts or questions around the Special Assessment District or the GoFundMe or anything like that, now's your chance. So please jump in. I will grab the link while I'm waiting.
I have a question. I trust the Army Corps of Engineers didn't evaluate the weight removal from Hidden Lake to Hamburg Bridge. I mean, what kind of effect? I mean, there is a lot of, as I'm sure everyone knows, there are a lot of weeds out in that area, right where Little Ore dumps in the Huron River. It gets really bad. I mean, you can almost can't kayak or canoe or whatever. The weeds are so bad there. I would think that should do something, but how much, I don't know. We don't have any idea about that. And let me ask a follow-up. Why isn't Hamburg Township removing those weeds? I was under the impression that they were doing that section. The misunderstanding that they were doing that section seems logical that they would do that section, particularly since they claim that this weed harvesting is solely for the purpose of Ore Lake. Why aren't they doing that section? That just doesn't seem to make logical sense to me.
Yeah, so I can jump in on those questions, and then other folks, please respond as well. But I'll start. So for your first question about the weeds and the Army Corps, no, they did not run the weed harvesting into their model. Um, I'm not sure how much data they had they were using from the Huron River. We can reach out and ask about that. At least at this point, the Army Corps is done, but we can talk with our hydrologists about that. We do have the data about the impact, like I said, on the weed harvesting on our lake, so we can ask them about those impacts. Um, I'm not sure what they're able to do with the model for indicating like increased water flow, at like outflow on the river. So that's a good question, Brett. I appreciate that, and we'll make a note of that to be able to reach out to them. In response to your second question about Hamburg Township and the weed harvesting, so Hamburg Township, the way where they're able to get their harvester into the river is actually downstream a little ways, downstream of the Hamburg Road Bridge a ways. And they also, when the weeds are pulled out, the weeds are pulled out at the wastewater treatment plant downstream of the bridge. And so oftentimes depending on the river level, sometimes they are able to go up a bit higher. But oftentimes the river level is too high and they actually can't get the harvester in under the Hamburg Road Bridge. And so they're not able to get in up here. The resident funded weed harvesting, we have a bit more flexibility as to who we would work with, like the organization, the company that would be doing the harvesting. And because it'd be resident funded, a bit easier to get access up here, like right outside Little Ore into the river, to be able to do the harvesting in this area. So it's a little bit of a different, it's basically dependent on where they drop the harvester in and whether or not they can get it under the bridge, that kind of thing. That's what I've been told at this point. Feel free, other folks, if you want to jump in as well.
Yeah, Brett, as we talked the other day, this is Carrie. Like Amber said, the machine they use that the township uses from the bridge down is a bigger machine and bigger trucks to haul away because you got to take the stuff away. Not only is it a problem getting the harvester itself under the bridge, if the water's high, there's no place up here for a truck to back in for the size of trucks they use to actually haul the weeds away. The contractor that Kurt has gotten hold of has a smaller machine and smaller trucks, and they've looked at the Riverside launch over by the culvert, and they have already said to him that they can get their equipment in there. So we're going to be more flexible because they have equipment that they can get in there with that the township can't.
Our lunch.
Yes, thanks,
Thank you,
Steve.
Karen. And thank you, Amber.
Other questions or thoughts?
In terms of notifying folks about the GoFundMe, I know that on Riverside for one of the parks, there used to be a gentleman, I don't know, maybe he still does it, that would go door to door with hi, I'm here, we need some money to do they have somebody that takes care of the park that's right on Little Ore, right near the river. So I don't know, do you think that maybe that would be an option? Some like people from the particular section of a particular area on or around Ore Lake going door to door and saying, hey, here's what we're doing. We're trying to get this machine in to clear the weeds, where they have not been cleared before, et cetera, et cetera. Can you contribute $50 or whatever you can do? Is that an option in terms of getting more funds in that GoFundMe account?
That's certainly an option. I know there are some folks that are actually going to be putting out flyers around, possibly even this weekend, around the lake to let folks know about it. I think that's honestly just based on capacity. So I will admit I do not have the capacity to go door to door. I don't have the time at the moment, but if other folks are wanting to do that, by all means. The one thing to keep in mind is if people want to do that, to be clear what you're going door to door for, because there is going to also be folks going door to door for the special assessment district petitions. So just kind of being clear, like what for one, not the other, or so on.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
For the weed harvesting based on the GoFundMe, is it a threshold then we have to hit 5,000 then at least to get one day? what happens if we get half that amount? I mean, is there a current kind of balance?
That's a great question, Paula. I'm not sure. Kurt Richardson has been coordinating that effort. We can ask him. Carrie, I thought you had talked to him. Did you talk to him about that?
Yeah, the consensus was being resident funded and kind of a, we're throwing the carpet bombing out there with the flyers and hoping for the best. I know if we make 5,000, we get one harvesting. We go one day. Let's not talk about full harvesting because a day may not do from the culvert all the way to the bridge. I don't know how fast, how efficient they are. I believe that their belief is with the smaller machine, it's a 2-day. Thanks, Pat. 2340. That's good. It's probably a 2-day process to do all the weeds between the outlet of the Riverside culvert all the way down to the bridge, I think. So would we take half of that? That's all we get? Sure. If we come up $1,000 short, we've had a discussion with a few of the neighbors who said they'd probably kick in the difference. So this is really kind of a grassroots thing there where, if you can help with more than $50, that's great because you may be covering somebody that can't, so that's what we're hoping for.
Right.
Yeah, and when I had talked to Kurt, that was, I believe, Carrie, that's what I had heard too, is that it would take really 2 days to do get all the weeds out from in that whole area. That's not to say one day wouldn't hopefully help, but the 2
Right.
days is ideal.
Really, that's where the $10,000 number came from for 2 days of their work. Yes.
Other questions or anything? And if you can't see the chat, I know some people are on their phones. Patrick, thank you for putting that in the chat. Currently, the resident funded weed harvesting is at $2,340. So almost halfway there.
Halfway to day one.
Yep. Yes, halfway to day one, almost.
If anybody's interested in helping distribute the flyers, we're just going to use the rubber bands to put them on the outside of people's mailboxes or in the area of their driveways. We don't know exactly when we're going to do it within the next 5 days, weather dependent and schedule dependent. But if you're available and interested in helping distribute those flyers in certain areas near your home, if you could email me, and I'll put my email in the chat. We'd
Thank
love
you,
to have
Maureen.
some help with that. I know Carrie's going to take care of a little bit. I'm going to be doing some, but we could, more hands on deck would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maureen and Carrie and others. Other questions, thoughts, comments?
I don't see Tony on the line, but is the river cleanup, is that with the Livingston County Wildlife Club or whatever that is, or?
The Conservation Club. I don't know. That's a good question for Tony. Let me grab his email again and I can put that in the chat for folks that are interested in helping with that. In the past, you'd meet up. I think Mark, you've helped with that before in the past. The
Yep.
meetup was at the Livingston Conservation Club. I'm not sure if it still is. So I can check with Tony, and actually I would say reach out to Tony and ask because it's a couple weeks from now. So the river cleanup. All right. Other questions, thoughts, anything? All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I'll stay on. We still have another 10 minutes. So I'm happy to be here, but thank you all for joining. Thank you to all of you who've been helping work on all sorts of projects throughout this. This is certainly a team effort as we all try and tackle different aspects of all that we're doing to try and respond and address the flooding. So I really appreciate it.
Great
And I
job,
saw your
Amber.
faces.
Yes.
What was that?
Appreciate your
Thank you.
leadership.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you guys for your leadership. Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. You all have a good night.
All right. Good
You
night.
too.
Hey, Carrie.
Hey, what's up?
Nothing. I'm hoping we can raise some more money. We still got $100 tonight. That's good.
Oh, good. Great.
Up from what it was earlier.
Yeah.